Humanity is a quality, an attribute we are born with, granting us the ability to feel, empathize with the other, to comprehend and be sympathetic to them, needing us to search beyond ourselves. Humanity encourages emotions, dreams and memories, and just as it can be discovered and cultivated, it can be lost in the way, consumed. It's humanity that defines us, and we project it into the things and people we love, maybe as a reflection of ourselves. Humanity in Berserk is about finally gaining control of one's own life to then lose that control, immediately or after long, through fortunate and unfortunate events where to be human means to struggle, to be constantly and restlessly weakened and somehow, from somewhere, find the strength to struggle on. Berserk has in Griffith and Guts the most iconic examples of where the embracement of one's humanity or its rejection can take a man. Ever since the day Griffith saw it, that castle from the cobblestone of those back alleys, he had his humanity corroded day by the thought of that view. Griffith is a man devoured by desire. His dream was a grand one, but his limitless ambition eventually consumed him, spending his humanity in blood for a pair of wings. I believe desire to be one of the two extreme examples of humanity in Berserk. At its core, desire is the essence of egoism. Griffith's dream, for its nature, was a crimson one, and he, well aware of it, still couldn't keep himself from marching down that blood-smeared path. If any traces of humanity were to be searched in Griffith's human days, then they would be found on his hands. Not guilt, but simple stains of blood from a leader of thousands who understood, far too well, the prizing lives of his dream. He understood his blazing and infernal flame of ambition to be the end of so many dreams. A flame fueled by countless sacrifices, placing their dreams into his, willingly, out of adoration. It's pretty ironic how Griffith used to appear much more godly during his legendary human days than after reincarnating into Femto, back when all he accomplished was seriously and truly a miracle. When he, as a human, was invincible, but losing was still a possibility. The dirt on Griffith's hands isn't the only glimpses of his humanity, in spite of being very cold ones. Guts is still his humanity, even during Falconia. The inner discord, the unsolvable doubt after meeting Guts, whether his purpose resided in that castle or in this man, the indecision to tear Griffith apart as a vortex of conflicting feelings gave him no answer, and so he risked his life twice to save him, putting himself in harm's way, for someone else's sake, potentially giving up his dream for one man, one soldier. How long ago did someone he was supposed to have in hand instead gain such a strong hold on him? Guts was the one and only person who made Griffith forget his dream. The only one able to grow that junk doll. The first person he ever wanted. Worthy of being called an equal. So it's no surprise he lost control once he left the Hawks, and his reaction implicitly answered his question. Guts had with time become Griffith's new dream, purpose, and paradoxically, but this is the beauty of being human, it was Guts' thought that kept Griffith alive in his year of torture, and it would still be him, along with Casca, to preserve the last bit of humanity within him once reincarnated, also thanks to the Moonlight Boy. Much like Griffith, who experienced a transition of his purpose from a thing to a person, Guts underwent a similar development through a lot of suffering, which in the end brought him to embrace and favor his humanity over the beast inside. Ever since he was born from the corpse of his mother and adopted by mercenaries, Guts had only one word in mind: survive. Before he knew it, he found himself holding a sword. The sword was all he ever knew. It was there, with him, in every moment. The sword was a way to hopefully establish a bond with Gambino, which he never managed to do. Guts never had a second to sit down and think, so the sword, as an extension of his body and mind, became the only thing in the world that could give him comfort. The hope of a father's acknowledgement, the teddy bear to hug at sleepless nights, the embrace of love numbing the pain, the one thing that could make him feel at ease and so safe, loyal, familiar, family. And Guts desperately wanted a family. After Gambino's death, Guts realized he just didn't know where he was going with his life. Finally unbound, he discovered his lack of purpose, of a dream, and despite accepting his death, wanting it, he still lifted his sword. The quest for a purpose and Guts' humanification received a considerable boost in a particular occasion after joining the Hawks, and it was on the night he, passed out, was held warm by Casca's body. It was Casca, the one who managed to finally touch him, to make a tangible contact with him, and to start the slow process of healing his traumas, which would still require years between several back and forths in terms of development. Guts' beauty lies right here, in him being a struggler, in constant regressions and evolutions, like a raw gem being refined slowly and then suddenly cut apart and returning raw, only to restart the process of refinement over and over. With his time in the Hawks, Guts was reminded, especially after Griffith's speech on dreams, to be stuck in a limbo, without a dream, a purpose, an ambition. Until then, he had in fact always served other people's purposes, not his own, and that would change with his departure. And this bewilderment definitely made him seem more human than Griffith, who instead had his life planned from childhood. During his time spent in the mountains, it was Godot to shed light on Guts' crisis. Much like the blacksmith, Guts was denied the possibility to choose his own life, but they had something more beautiful in common: sparks. As described by Godot, the ephemeral sparks created from smiting and engulfing him were like his life springing into the air before his eyes. The sword for Guts was the means through which he experienced everything in his life. All was thanks to it. Life that was present in the sparks, springing when crossing swords with his opponents. Their thoughts and feelings would collide and confront themselves, and by making his own sparks, Guts could prove his existence, his humanity, his identity, free will, a purpose and direction to give to his life. While productive and successful in understanding himself, Guts' journey highlighted a problematic trait of his character: the tendency to leave irreplaceable things behind to chase uncertainty at the risk of losing that treasure. Again, it's only with Casca that Guts found an even more natural answer for himself than the sword. What had started years back in that tent culminated in Guts' return to the Hawks and, most importantly, in making love with Casca. Slowly, the sword Guts used to sleep with would take a new form in his mind, a feminine and lovable one. It's emblematic in this the fact that after making love with her, Guts, for some reason he couldn't explain to himself, thought of that time he had received medicine from Gambino. That time when he had thought to himself how it was the sword to chase the thoughts away from his mind. It would now be Casca to be within his heart. Love, the other end of humanity, and essence of altruism. And just as emblematic is the fact that Guts, in this episode, asked Casca to go with him, a perspective that he wouldn't keep being faithful to in the sad near future, leaving her behind. After the eclipse, everything changed. Guts' humanity would be challenged with no rest by indomitable pain. For 2 longest years, Guts would turn back into what he used to be, if not worse. An isolated beast showing its fangs and claws, trying to survive. Scaring anyone away and, of course, unable to stand the touch of others. Giving in to the hatred and slowly being consumed by the beast inside of him. Once again, returned to Gado, it would be this fatherly figure to enlighten him, using himself as an example, not to replicate. Gado's speech, rebuking Guts' act of leaving Casca at his house in that condition and for so long, would only shed more light on how deeply flawed Guts' heart was. Reproached, with no answers and excuses left, devastated by his loveless behavior, Guts had his humanity restored by the old man. Hatred is where those who cannot look at pain in the eyes run off to, and Guts hated and hated and hated, only to keep on hating. Gado suggested him to stop, to run away from hatred, to run away with Casca, but he just couldn't give up that beastly side of him yet. He hadn't been able to bear the pain and immerse himself in sorrow with her because he favored his hatred for Griffith over his love for Casca. And so, for the 3rd time after Gambino and the Hawks, he had run away from the irreplaceable things in his life. Understood the message and gone to rescue Casca, Guts would keep Gado's last words in his heart, to not abandon what one can't replace, and so he would start his journey with her while keeping his hatred under control and letting his love for her live with it in a sort of very precarious balance which would break very often. During his journey with Casca, this time to Elfheim for a cure and not aimlessly trying to find Griffith, Guts began to slowly accept others, in desperate need of help to protect his love. Step by step, he started to resemble his older self from his time in the Hawks. A new family had been built around him that allowed him to accept and embrace others, to understand his need for them, for their love, restoring his humanity once again. The Berserker armor is a perfect metaphor that translates Guts' rage into a physical form, and no more simple in his thoughts. The beast constantly tempts him to get rid of Casca, speaking of her as an obstacle for the worthier objective of taking revenge on Griffith, and feeding on Guts' storm of feelings, constantly raising doubts in his mind about his choice of bringing Casca with him, trying to win him over. But is Guts really that weak to give in to the beast's provocation? After reading the latest chapter, 368, I'm confident to say yes, because Guts is the weakest and at the same time the strongest human. Guts did not trade his emotions, weaknesses, bonds, strengths like Griffith. Guts is simply a man, even stripped of the ability to dream because of the brand of sacrifice, sentenced to stay human, and to be haunted, suffer, struggle. But all of this, while weakening him, also strengthens him, because he now has a true purpose, Casca, and his discordant feelings, his darkness, is what makes him mature, unique and different, better, best, human. Berserk is first and foremost a love story, about love for life, and the purpose you decide to give it through all the adversities, and you fall in love with that purpose, with that warmth, with that reason to fight, chasing it to the ends of the world, sometimes giving your own humanity for it, other times discovering it in yourself and cultivating it, doubting it, misinterpreting it, but in the end, overcoming the beast inside and winning, for your sake, for her sake. As some bonus thoughts on Berserk, I'd like to talk a bit about the contrast man versus God, will versus fate. Is it even worth the time to wonder about such things? For example, wasn't God supposed to die when born? What was it that saved him? Fate, intended as a series of coincidences, or will, as the right and ability to determine life autonomously? You could argue that ultimately things go the way they go. Whatever happens, happens, would say my friend Spike. But a few men will be satisfied with that mentality, because men need answers, a reason to explain pain and pleasure, life and death. Humanity needs to dream and imagine, sometimes at a great cost. It's very interesting to me how God in Berserk is but a product of humanity. The idea of evil, idea meant in the Platonic sense, is God. Humanity has needed from the dawn of time reasons to justify what it couldn't understand. A reason for both joy and despair, and even life or death themselves. And found in God that explanation, to both worship and blame. In Berserk, God was born thanks to humanity's evil and collective subconsciousness, and even if unable to express free will, it still influences the small pieces in history so that causality can take its course and reach predetermined points that allow humans to have events happen and a justification for them. It sounds complicated, but that's exactly what humanity wanted. A reason, and in fact, the idea of evil in Berserk controls fate and produces reasons through causality from deep within an abyss, terribly human. So, in short, God was created by the unconscious human will, and despite not being free, it still produces events through cause and effect within its margins of action. What if this philosophy around God isn't exactly that fictional? Don't humans believe in what they want to believe? But going back to Guts, what does fate have in store for him? Will Guts' behelit ruin forever his humanity? Or will the Berserker armor do it first? Well, all I know is that, in my opinion, the end of Berserk will feature Guts dropping his sword, the Dragon Slayer, in the graveyard record dedicated to the Hawks, demonstrating his embracement of humanity, projecting it into his love for Casca, and proving his evolution, moving from a beast finally dead and from a lack of purpose onto a new life with the brightest spark.